Well. It's another fine week making a podcast with my good friends AJ and Josh and
you know what they say,
Harvey.
You know what they say.
What do they say, my erudite friend?
Well. No man is a failure who has friends.
AJ. Brian, what the fuck was that?
Is that your Jimmy Stewart? Keep going.
I can't do voices. I can't do the voice. Okay.
You want the voice, Josh?
I'll do the voice. I'll do the voice, AJ.
One thing that kind of helps is you kind of rub the side of your face with your hand and palm skills your jaw down.
Yeah.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the worst of all possible worlds, the first and only podcast with 3 perfect Jimmy Stewart impressions. I am the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Bryans.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I'm Mickey Mouse.
We're back once again talking about case studies in the pop culture of a dying empire. Every week we talk about media narratives, the way that those narratives shape the world that we live in, and we're talking today about a classic, right after World War II narrative that I think has shaped the way that we see the holidays in this country, as well as what we think of as Christmas charity. It's a Wonderful Life.
We did an episode last year on A Christmas Story, and I made the point that usually you were either a Christmas Story household or you were It's a Wonderful Life household. In my experience, I had not seen the two overlap. And then I was told by quite a few people that they watched both of the movies. And so I apologize for not considering the secret third thing.
Yeah, that's, AJ, most people just watch movies. You and Josh are outside of the norm.
Yeah, but I was so excited because I did not watch this growing up. I watched this for the first time, I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago with my now spouse. It's one of their favorite movies of all time, and it's their sort of Christmas tradition to watch it. And I watched it for the first time and was emotionally destroyed by it. And it has, in the interim, become probably one of my favorite movies, or at least the most emotionally affecting of anyone I've ever seen. But what about y'all? How was this something you watched when you were kids, or is this something you came to later?
I came to it a little bit later in my childhood. I remember the first time I kind of saw it, but usually I did the Jimmy Stewart thing, so now I'm stammering.
You gotta pull it out of yourself.
But most of the ones that I remember watching as a kid, kind of, when you're less conscious of the things that you're watching, would be like Muppet Christmas Carol and A Christmas Story and the fucking claymation ones. And I hate those fucking movies. But once I got to It's a Wonderful Life and didn't see the whole thing from beginning to end, I realized immediately it's it's like A Christmas Story. It's also got a lot of lines that sound a lot like something that I have listened to quite a bit. That we will get back to in a couple weeks. Before this, the only Frank Capra movie that I had seen was Arsenic and Old Lace. Which is a movie without much thematic anything, right? It's a very silly movie about old ladies that kill people, and it's great from beginning to end, and it doesn't have any of the hallmarks that you associate with Capra. And this has all of them, but in kind of a different way, because usually a Frank Capra movie, the big remembered ones, aside from this one, involve actual politics, like people going to Washington, D.C., famously in the title of a movie. And
Mr. Smith, he did that.
He did that. Mr. Deeds also does these sorts of things. People actually getting to high places of power, where George remains solidly in his small town.
Right.
As a point of grievance for him throughout the entire film.
Right. He has ambitions of doing those things, of going and seeking his fortune in the big city or whatever, but it doesn't end up happening for him. So much of this film is about how to take the lot that you're given in life, make the most of it, and sort of change the lives of the people around you through your actions in that capacity.
It's a very Christian movie.
I mean, there are a couple moments of it being overtly Christian, right?
Yeah.
Particularly once we get into the war montage where they're going to church and they're praying at the end of all the
Capra
things.
just had a lot of footage left over from Why We Fight.
Yeah, it kind of does seem like that, doesn't it? And he certainly had access to it still because, you know, he had served. And this comes out a year after Why We Fight ends. This is a 1946 film.
Yeah, after the war itself ends. And that's really important. This movie starts with a big studio identifier, and it's not RKO, who is the big producer of this movie.
Yeah, it's the Liberty Bell.
It's Liberty Films. It's that fucking Liberty Bell again.
I got jump scared. I'm like, no, we can't go back. No more.
See, Brian has a plan. So yeah, 2 weeks ago, if you didn't listen to this episode, we talked about Why We Fight, the propaganda film series that Frank Capra made for the United States Army in World War II. That always ended with an image of the Liberty Bell and the big V that we took from the French resistance that became sort of the rallying cry for American involvement in the war.
Vendetta, yes.
Yes, right. V for yes. Yep. That's correct, AJ. We all had our
Guy Fawkes
gas masks.
who stormed the beaches of Normandy.
And the Liberty Bell is even like incorporated into the middle of the first Why We Fight film. And here we see it again because this is an independent production company started by Frank Capra.
Okay.
So he had begun just before World War II. He had made a movie under Frank Capra Pictures, and then he dissolved it when he enlisted. So once the war ended, he was like, well, we got to get this back up and running. So he teamed up with other Army Signal Corps guys, other Hollywood guys who had enlisted. Those guys were William Wyler, who directed Ben-Hur, Roman Holiday, The Children's Hour, Funny Girl, The Best Years of Our Life. That guy had hit after hit after hit.
Although I think his biggest hit was probably Wyler and Out.
Oh my God.
And producer Sam Briskin, George Stevens, another director who went on to direct Giant. He had done Swing Time. He was in charge of the unit that grabbed footage of the concentration camps as we liberated them.
Oh, wow.
And his documentary footage was shown at numerous Nazi war crimes trials. And it should be noted, all of them except for George Stevens were immigrants as well. Wyler was from Germany, Briskin was from Russia, Capra was from Sicily, and Stevens was from Oakland. And
the furthest reaches of Oakland.
They started this company, and it actually didn't stay up and running for very long. Part of that was the financial lack of success for It's a Wonderful Life, which we'll get into. But a part of it was that they got offered a good deal by Paramount, and by selling quickly after just a couple years of operation, they made a ton of money off of this deal. And that's different than if they had stayed with the studio and worked as salaried directors, because income tax in the post-war period meant that the highest brackets were taxed at about 90%.
Right.
So instead, they made all of this money from capital gains.
Yeah.
So they got to keep it in their pockets.
It's a real Potter move, honestly.
So they only like made 3 movies as Liberty Films.
So it was just fully acquired at that point.
Yeah,
It was
and part of the reason why It's a Wonderful Life becomes big later on, because it wasn't very successful in theaters, was because then Paramount ends up selling a bunch of the rights to its movies through the 40s. Like the company that buys those changes its name, gets acquired, merges, goes this way and that way.
Yeah.
And then,
one of those classic like things where the media landscape was so shaped by these mergers and acquisitions and rights deals, and the way that you would end up seeing this media was on a TV rerun or a limited theatrical release or whatever.
And the reason why It's a Wonderful Life became a big rerun picture was because its copyright lapsed. The paperwork didn't get filled out right.
Yeah.
And so you're running a TV station, and you suddenly have this free movie that has Jimmy Stewart, Frank Capra, TV's own Donna Reed.
Right.
Like, you're going to put that fucking thing. It's
Lionel
seasonal
Barrymore.
too, right? So it's like, oh, here's a special Christmas event movie here on NBC or whatever the fuck. Like, here's this movie that most people don't really remember, and then it becomes a staple as a result of that. The long story of the rights is that, of course, it's not still in the public domain. All this stuff got resolved. The company that acquired the other company that acquired the other company that had the rights was Viacom, which owns Paramount, which means it's technically a Paramount movie.
It's a Paramount picture again.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. No. So what's interesting to me about this is that it's similar to the situation with Christmas Story, which we talked about last year. The whole reason that A Christmas Story became a holiday classic is that they showed it on TNT every fucking year.
Yeah, for 24 hours straight.
Yeah, seriously. It's also the Shawshank thing, right? Shawshank Redemption, a movie that was mildly well received, but then got all this replay on TNT and sort of became this classic. And that's kind of how I think a lot of American classics are made, is just rerunning on TV. I don't know if that's true anymore with the streaming model.
Yeah, no, it's not. But like in the old days of linear television, like that was a way bigger audience than any theatrical release could be.
So pulling it back into It's a Wonderful Life, it begins its life as a novella called The Greatest Gift, written by Philip Van Doren Stern in 1943.
His main thing was being a Civil War historian.
Oh.
So he wrote biographies of like Robert E. Lee and John Wilkes Booth and stuff.
Yeah, so The Greatest Gift itself was loosely based on A Christmas Carol. It follows mostly the like last 30 minutes of It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
Which is where, obviously he wishes for a time where he wasn't born.
Yeah, you more or less just start with the guy on a bridge. And then this mysterious hairbrush salesman walks up to him and is like, hey, do you want to not exist anymore? Here's what everything would be like if you weren't born. Why don't you check out what the town is like by pretending to be a brush salesman? Here's my bag of brushes.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Basically, even before this thing is published properly, it is acquired by RKO Pictures.
Yeah.
And Cary Grant is originally attached to star in it. And they commission a lot of screenwriters to take a stab at it. They end up with 3 different drafts, and they kind of throw up their hands and like, these are all terrible. Somebody else figured this out. And Capra at the time had a deal with RKO Pictures.
Yeah.
And they gave it to him and were just like, make something out of this. So he gathered what I can only call like the Avengers of screenwriters in the 40s. We got Francis Goodrich, we got Albert Hackett, we got Joe Swirling, we got Michael Wilson, and we have Dorothy motherfucking Parker come in to do a little bit of spit, shine, polish on this thing. And I think a lot of the movie's acidity is probably the influence of Dorothy Parker. That is just speculation on my part, but there are several scenes in this that feel very much like her writing. This is a woman who had like this vendetta against A.A. Milne, who is the writer of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, she and Christopher Robin had that in common.
Yeah.
The thing is that much like me, she hated whimsy.
Yeah, and
That's
like
very true.
Any sort of sentimentality. So she goes to see A.A. Milne's Broadway show, and I will never forget this review that she wrote. Basically, at the end of the play, it's 2 lovers who live like next door to each other and would knock on the wall in order to like communicate messages to each other, right? At the end of the play, the woman dies and the man is sitting on the other side. And she describes this scene where he knocks on the wall a certain number of knocks for like letters of the alphabet. So, for example, the letter I, he knocks 9 times. And so she describes him sitting down and he knocks 9 times for I. And she's like, surely he's not going to spell out I love you.
No.
Knocks out 12 times for L. And she's like, he can't do the whole thing. Cut to black. End my misery. He knocked 16 times for O. And the exact quote from Dorothy Parker is, he knocked 16 times for O and I shot myself.
Yeah.
Her influence on this movie, I think, is sort of what saves it from being just treacle.
Yeah.
Right? This is not like a Golly G. Willikers version of life. This is life in all of its pain and torment. And what makes it so remarkable is that it still finds a way to like reaffirm the human experiment at the end.
Audiences did not think the same thing at the time. It got pretty positive reviews. The way that history kind of gets written is that it's like, oh, the critics all hated it and blah, blah, blah. But like, if you read, for instance, Variety's review, which you can just look up by Bert Briller. That is a 1940s guy name. That's a guy with a boater hat.
Do you think he saw the cop on screen and went, "That's my name. I'm gonna hate this."
But Bert Briller is absolutely wet with joy over this film. He is losing his shit. He loves the music. He loves the set design. He's singing everybody's praise. He's even talking about the new technique that they did for snow and how much better it looks than all the other snow he's seen before.
Snow looks great, honestly.
It does.
For shooting in Encino, California, that snow looks amazing.
The way that it sort of like falls and grips onto clothes looks a lot like real snow.
Well, with the use of new technique employing CO2 base, snow is facsimiled far better than ever before. That is from the review.
We did it, America.
The New York Times, Bosley Crowther himself, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, but Bosley over here, not a huge fan. His summation is, Mr. Capra's turkey dinner's philosophy, while emotionally gratifying, doesn't fill the hungry paunch. Which is mostly like, I thought it was fine, but I wanted it to be better, essentially.
You know who has a really hungry paunch?
Oh, you see, Goku, what you gotta do is you gotta have one sandwich, and then you gotta put another one in.
Oh, I don't know. I just had a big Frank Capra turkey dinner. I don't know if I could eat a sandwich.
See, we gotta fill that punch, Goku. We gotta expand that punch. You want some gravy, Goku? You just say the word. I'll throw a lasso around it. I'll feed that down your gullet.
I hate it.
What would Goku say in response to that, Brian?
How could you possibly lasso gravy? You must be really strong. I should fight you.
And then Jimmy Stewart and Goku fight in the air for 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Why did I ever want to do this?
Well, that's a road we went down.
Hey, we love it. It's
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Part of the reason why it had a sort of bad history until it lapsed into the public domain was because it was made for $2.3 million in 1945.
That's a lot of money.
5 years earlier, Citizen Kane was made for $750,000, and it was over budget.
Wow.
So this is a very expensive movie, and Liberty Films needed it to make at least $4 million, and it didn't. It did not.
Huh.
It did a perfectly respectable showing for a middle-of-the-road movie of that year, but it was supposed to be the tentpole for Liberty Pictures. And it's for a movie that's just about a guy in town. You know, it's not a war picture. They're not flying airplanes around and shit. It's just about a guy in town, but it covers a long stretch of time. And you can tell even from the scene on the ice towards the beginning, it's like, oh, that is a full set. They made a shitload of fake ass ice for this.
Which looks very real.
Yeah.
And so we might as well get into talking a little bit about how this movie opens up, right?
Yeah.
We get our nice title cards. We see the names of the many, many writers.
Liberty Films, let freedom ring.
Let freedom ring. And we are now in this sleepy little town, the town of Bedford Falls, which this is in the state of New York somewhere.
Yeah, it's basically Seneca Falls.
Anyway, we get these voiceovers. People are praying for a man known as George Bailey.
Yeah.
They just really want him to be okay, you know?
Yeah.
And from here we go up to space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The moon flies by. Whee! And we've got some constellations, and they're chatting with each other, these constellations. They kind of like light up when you hear this voiceover of them
they're
talking.
angels.
Right.
The angels are...
They're constellations.
Weirdly Mormon.
And there's a really fun little moment where we're like, oh, where's that one guy? And then there's a star that just flies in from the left side of the screen.
Oh, yeah, he's got an IQ of a rabbit.
So we got this really hard case on Earth. Who are we sending? I don't know. Let's get Clarence the idiot.
Well, so here's the thing.
There.
Clarence is really good-hearted.
Yes.
He really seems to get it on an interpersonal level. He's got the faith. What he doesn't have, though, is his wings.
No.
And that's, of course, the thing that every angel wants to get. So if he aces this assignment, he will finally get his wings. So what we learn here is that George Bailey, our protagonist, who we actually haven't really seen yet, we've just heard of him, he is about to attempt to take his own life. And it's up to Clarence to save his ass.
He's got an hour before he has to get sent down to Earth.
And so the framing device here then is we basically see through Clarence's eyes, essentially, he is the person watching all of this, what George's life has looked like up until this point. So now we're back in 11 or something, I want to say, like early 1900s, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
like mid 19. I was kind of like,
That's what it was, yeah.
Because of a reference that happens in the next scene, I was like, oh, I guess this might be just after the war. And I was sort of going off of the fact that Jimmy Stewart himself was born in 1908. So he's at least 10 years old. So maybe like just after World War I.
Point here is that it is sort of appealing to the memory of the average American moviegoer at this time, right? It's like, this is your upbringing. Don't you remember going sledding with your boys down at the old pond?
Yeah. Don't you remember losing your hearing because you jump into an ice cold lake to save your brother from drowning?
Yeah, this was like, remember the time when kids just died? Because that happened, like you either got tuberculosis or you had some sort of horrible injury. You were trampled by a banker's horse. Like that's just the kind of things that happened back then.
So this is like an early core memory that we see here. We've got George, we've got his friends. They're on these big snow shovels and they're sledding down a hill. And one of them, this is Harry, George's brother, sleds a little bit too far and goes down into the frozen lake. And George saves his life. This is a core memory for George. And as we were saying, it's also how he loses hearing in one of his ears.
At first glance, it can seem like the time jumps are random or that the construction of the movie can be a little bit more like A Christmas Story, which is a bunch of vignettes. But it's so smart in the way that it tracks the progress of time through the good deeds of George Bailey and seeing the payoff to those good deeds sometimes years after the fact. And it makes sense to me dramaturgically.
There we go.
Because we're looking at it through the eyes of angels, and that's what they would track things by, is by your good deeds.
Yeah.
And I think that is so smart and something I did not clock until this
And
week.
it's so important dramaturgically, just in terms of what it does to the audience, because this little moment with his brother is a lot more important than it seems.
And it already seems important. I mean, he saved his life, but, you know, the way that it's presented, and this is, I think, very interesting, it's not this, like, really harrowing thing.
No, it's just this thing happens. No. Oh, shit. He goes and gets him. We, like, wipe over to the next section.
So now we're with George. We're at Old Man Gower's drugstore where he works as... I don't know, just the shop boy, I guess. There are two little girls here. They both have a crush on George. These two girls are named Mary and Violet.
As we go into Gower's, we get a brief shot of Mr. Potter's carriage, who will be our main antagonist for the whole film.
Right, he has his own stagecoach.
Yeah, that is monogrammed. It has HP on the side.
A friend of the show and patron John Leavitt was talking about how this movie is very specifically upstate New York and how it kind of couldn't be set at this time in any other place in the U.S., in part because, you have these roads with cars and horse-drawn carriages at the same time, and you have stuff like there is an old abandoned mansion. This place has been around long enough to have an old abandoned mansion.
And you've got rail connections that are used regularly. Yeah, it's very specific.
People who go down to New York City to work for the summer and come back. A lot of very peculiar details like that.
Potter is just a malevolent force that will not go away. Like, we cover a lot of time in this movie, and Potter does get older, but not really.
Right.
Like,
it's like the principal in Back to the Future.
What we're kind of learning here is what George's big dreams were as a child.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
He always had that glint in his eye. He always wanted to see the world, but he also cares greatly for the people around him. Old Man Gower, the man who runs the drugstore, he sees him crying, and then he also sees a telegram, George does, of like, we are so sorry to let you know that your son died of influenza.
Yeah.
Right.
And Gower's not just sad. He is drunk as fuck. He is way far gone. Yes. And he's quite mean to George. And we don't get enough information to know if Gower is kind of generally rather mean or if it's just because he's totally wasted right now.
Right. You know, it just kind of sits with that because all it wants us to do is, as you were saying, AJ, have us experience what George does in this moment. Right. He has a choice to make. Does he just want to be like, man, fuck that guy, I'm out of here. Because to be clear, he gets the shit beat out of him by old man Gower.
And this is very important, though. It's because Gower has put poison pills in medicine meant for one of the kids in town.
Yeah, because he's so drunk and so beside himself that he's not even aware, which bottles he's grabbing to make the prescriptions.
And Gower kind of realizes what he's done and hugs him and says, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, that slapping scene was real.
His ear is actually bleeding.
That's real blood?
Actually bleeding?
Oh, no.
Well, back then it was okay to hit kids.
Yeah.
That's just what you did,
He what?
This was the same guy who played Jesus in The King of Kings.
Yes. And he had done a couple of other Capra films as well.
Yeah, no, he always shows. This was a man born in like the 1870s. So
sure.
Like if you see his picture on IMDb, I'm sure that picture was taken before the 20th century.
That's crazy.
Wow, that's wild. And I mean, this is also like realistic Wit's End, right?
Yes.
Yeah. To me, and it's so funny that Odyssey references It's a Wonderful Life as often as it does and then learns nothing from it, which is namely, Gower is like mean.
Yes.
And he's gross and he's just a vile human being. But the fact that George forgives
George
him
is
anyway,
young, right? He's not even a teenager.
Child.
This is back
He's
when
probably 11 or so here.
When
yeah.
kids because the telegram says that his son died of influenza, so we can assume that meant Spanish flu. Which would be 1918 to 1920. So this is kind of in keeping with, George, just like Jimmy Stewart, was born in 1908. So he's, probably 10 years old here.
This movie never shies away from the actual horrors of like living through this time. And it's not even like it's saying that the world is terrible and everyone's going to die, but just like being truthful about it. There's something that is so truthful at the center of this movie.
It reminds me a lot of other movies and plays that were being made around this time, like the play Merrily We Roll Along by Kaufman and Hart. And Capra had adapted a Kaufman and Hart play into a movie earlier.
Yeah, you can't take it with you.
And then there's the musical Allegro that Rodgers and Hammerstein did around this time. That's also about like tracing a guy's life from the point of his birth, basically, to his midlife crisis. Just a bunch of guys having midlife crises at this time and engaging in their nostalgia for the 1910s.
That's interesting too, right? Because not only, I think, is it a matter of these individual people going through their own midlife crises as men, I think that this was also an inflection point for the country itself. Sure. We now were at the point where we, won the war or whatever, and we're looking back on our entire history and now coming to a completely different position in terms of our global standing. And the question is, with all of the things that we have done up until this point, what do we become now? These were open questions, and I think that what the media was trying to do, what films were trying to do, was come up with potential answers for that question.
Yeah.
Right. Because George wants to get the hell out of Bedford Falls, right? Even as a kid, he's just like, I'm going to see the world. And he also addresses Mary by saying, "Say brainless," which is by the way, fucking gold. Yeah,
but I should say this too. I have nothing but praise for every single child actor in this movie.
Are great
they're
in this.
They're so good. And I have to assume that a lot of this is down to Frank Capra's direction.
Yeah,
he must have just had a way with kids, because every single delivery in this movie from these kids is so funny and so truthful.
And but again, Josh, like you were saying, like, what was America's place in the world at this inflection point, right? Our instinct was to travel, to go out into the world, to expand our borders.
Right. And all of these people had done that. They had gone overseas, including Jimmy Stewart. He served in the war as well.
But Capra's argument is that we have to focus on us now, right? Before we can go out into the world, we have to figure out who we are as a people. And this, I think, is his thesis statement of what makes a good American. Like so many of his films, but I think this is the one that is the most articulate and the most effective.
And I think it's also a thesis statement on what makes a good American movie. One thing that's really interesting in the Variety review that's just a complete, like, oh my God, see this thing, is that it starts with, in the wake of the billowing ballyhoo, which has preceded the first entry from Liberty Films, will come resurging word of mouth to accelerate the whirring theater's wickets. after a somewhat clammy cycle.
You gotta cool it with the fucking alliteration, my guy. That's too
This
much.
guy's name is
man.
Bert Briller. All he can do is alliteration. After a somewhat clammy cycle of psychological pics and a tortured trend of panting propaganda vehicles.
Dude, he loves the alliteration.
He loves
The
it.
April air wholesomeness and humanism of this natural bring back vividly the reminder that essentially the screen best offers unself-conscious, forthright entertainment, right?
Yeah.
The movies are back. We're not in the war period anymore. We're making real movies about that are movies, right? We're digging up Max Sennett's corpse and we're getting his best gag man to tell us how a movie's supposed to be made.
One of the ways I think that you find that, right, find a good motivation is by grounding it in the emotional circumstances of these characters.
Yeah.
And one excellent example of that is the introduction of Peter Bailey, George's father, and Mr. Potter, the horrible fucking tycoon who owns much of the town.
Played by Lionel Barrymore,
Yes. Yeah.
who is of the legendary Barrymore acting family that goes back to basically our country's inception.
And we'll die with Drew.
Oh, no.
Oh, God, that is, oh, no.
So Peter Bailey runs a building and loan, which
A
provides...
thing we all know what that is. Yeah.
We love it.
You got to wish it a Merry Christmas.
Brian, do you want to talk a little bit here about what a building and loan actually
I can
is?
do that now. Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So a building and loan is, well, so I had to find a Forbes article that was like talking about the history of building and loans, and it used specifically It's a Wonderful Life as its example because it's all anyone fucking knows about these fucking things anymore.
Because I'd heard of savings and loans, but I'd never heard of building and loans.
And a lot of savings and loans were building and loans before they became savings and loans. And so a building and loan is a type of community investment, a cooperative, basically, that we had from the 1830s until just after World War II. They were dying out, which is why this is kind of nostalgic. This is kind of like playing into this is something that held on to our values that was good for our communities and it's going away. Maybe we as individuals can come and save it again. So building and loans had been around for a while, but then they became huge by the time the Depression hit.
Okay.
From 1920 to 1930, they basically doubled in terms of membership. But they were basically a way for you to take out a mortgage, and then instead of paying directly into your mortgage, you just paid money into the building and loan.
Got it. So your mortgage is essentially what you get in what you are paying against, rather than being like equity on the home itself is equity in the co-op?
Yeah, so this Forbes article by John Wake, which we'll link, the way that he explains it, so if you borrowed $2,000, this is a quote, to buy a house, depending on interest rates, you might pay $10 a month to the building and loan and interest. In addition, you might pay another $10 per month to the building and loan that in its roundabout way would eventually pay off your mortgage. That second $10 did not pay the principal.
Right.
And it didn't go into a savings account so you could save up to $2,000 eventually to pay off the mortgage. That $10 a month went to buy shares in the building and loan itself. So typically around 12 years in this scenario, you would own $2,000 worth of shares in the building and loan. And that's how the mortgage paid off because it had accrued further interest from other people buying in. And then your mortgage is paid off lickety split in a single payment.
Wow.
Right. Okay. So yeah, what happens is the building and loan basically buys the remainder, like buys the principal back from you once the term of your loan is.
And it's worth noting that it offers you a 12-year mortgage. Of course, now it's like you get 30-year mortgages.
Right.
But back then, a bank would only typically issue a 4-year mortgage. So if you couldn't afford payment on a house that you would pay off in 4 years, you were kind of stuck.
Sure.
Until a building and loan came around. And the way that more of this interest accrues is, of course, you have banks and stuff investing in this as well. And no matter how many shares you own, right? Maybe you're just about to the end of paying everything off and you have, $1,000 of shares. Someone else only has $10 of shares. Each individual stakeholder has one vote.
Okay.
You do not have votes based on how much stake you have. So it's a very unique form of finance that straight up just does not exist in our time, in our parents' time.
Right.
Like
this is interesting too, right? Because just hearing about the basic way that works, there's so many clear, if you talk about it in purely like modern capitalist terms, there's so many built-in inefficiencies there that make it a lot less effective as a means of making money than any conventional loan structure.
Right, which is why Potter is so against it and wants to see this thing shut down.
Right.
My favorite thing is like within like 3 seconds of meeting him, he's in this like very evil wheelchair. It looks like it would have a flamethrower on the top if it could. But
just like Charles Foster Kane towards the end of that movie.
Yeah, and he has a little guy with him, and he wants to like intimidate Peter Bailey, who is George Bailey's father, and he leans over to the guy next to him. He's like, "Shove me over," and he gets pushed closer, and you're just like, "Oh man, this is the devil.
Yeah,
this man is the literal devil."
And Barrymore's having a great time too.
He's chewing the fuck out of that scenery. But here's the thing that I guess I wanted to say is that, you know, it's a very important delineation here that I think is maybe not entirely legible anymore because of the fact that we don't have this structure anymore.
Yeah.
The Baileys are not bankers.
Right.
No. They are facilitating the transfer of money.
Yeah.
But they are essentially guardians to a community trust as opposed to, you know, profiteering off of these things.
And that trust, unfortunately, has to bank with Potter's bank.
Right, because he has the capital.
And is also being invested in by Potter.
And the thing that does remain, though, is that you understand that Potter is the one with all the money and the Baileys are the one who are constantly trying to just survive, who are like constantly treading water.
And to be clear, the Baileys, I wouldn't say that they're like, you know, living hand to mouth. Like they're doing okay. Also, a little later on in the movie, when George and Mary, you know, are about to go on their honeymoon, they get quite a bit of money to be able to do that. It's not as if they are, you know, they are comfortably middle class.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
George spends his teenage years and early adulthood, he says, living like a miser so that he can pay his way through college because his parents couldn't put him or his brother through college.
Right.
No, I was just going to say that, like, it's not necessarily themselves, but the building and loan itself always seems to be like on the precipice of financial ruin.
Well, and the Baileys don't take more than they should. They could be richer off of this.
Right.
But they're too decent. They're decent people, and they're going to reinvest everything they can back in the savings and loan. But they still can afford, you know, a cook.
What it means to be a good capitalist, I think, in the eyes of Capra, is you are utilizing the mechanisms of capitalism to grow not just your own wealth, but the wealth of your entire community.
That you are looking out actively for your neighbor. And this is reflected in the way that people react to George Bailey when he's just walking around town, right? We see him now as a teenager, the 34-year-old teenager or whatever.
Well, he's so thin, and they just sort of emphasize, like they make him young by just putting him in clothes that emphasize how thin he is.
The time jump that happens here from when he's a kid to being a teenager, we see that he gets a suitcase for his travels that was purchased by Mr. Gower.
Yeah.
That this act of kindness that he showed to Gower by not ratting him out for accidentally putting the poison in or for beating the shit out of him, by not doing that, Gower has repaid him in kind.
Yeah.
That this act of kindness has led to real tangible results. It just took a very long time.
And Gower's drugstore is still up, right? Kids are still going and getting their chocolate sodas and raspberry ripples. And George is still going in and making a wish on a gigantic cigar lighter thing that I'm sure in 1946 the audience was like, I did that. That's me. I did that too when I was a kid. And all of us are like, cool, George.
I love that there's a flamethrower in the middle of the shop. I love that.
This suitcase is more than just a suitcase.
Yeah.
Because it's got his name monogrammed on it, and it represents Gower's investment in George's future. He's like, I know that as a kid, you always wanted to go out and seek your fortune. Here is a token of my appreciation for you that will, you know, help you along your way. This is a key item in his inventory.
And all George wants to do is get out. And he wants to travel the world, but the big thing right now is that he wants to go to college. He has made it long. So he could be actually like 20 or 22 or something, because he talks about his friends being through with college, but his brother is also about to graduate high school.
like everyone in town is like so invested in him like leaving. They're like, hey, George, you're going to get out of there. We see a newspaper that says Smith wins nomination.
Yeah, that was a nice little Easter egg. The Frank Capra extended universe.
It's just an entire country just full of guys who are all talking like this. Could you imagine? Could you imagine more than one Jimmy Stewart in one place?
I'm just imagining like a diehard Capra head going to the movies in 1947 and doing like the pointing soy Wojak at the...
Whoa! But we also get to see George Bailey and his family and the way he interacts with his family and that entire dynamic.
That's right.
I want to shout at the
cook.
screen. And as well as
who's a black woman
their cook,
and written kind of weird.
She is the only named black character in this movie, and then that should be noted.
When they're at the table, Harry says, "We're going to go to the dance tonight. We're going to use the new floor they put in." And George says, "Hope it works."
It's really
but it's just like a throwaway line, and they're already barreling through it.
And it turns out the floor does work.
It does?
Yeah, it sure does. That's foreshadowing, baby.
George accompanies his brother to this high school dance and has that like, oh my God, I'm surrounded by children feeling.
Yeah.
It's like, here are a bunch of people who are a couple years younger than me, but I am not in high school. I've been like, slaving away over at my dad's savings and my dad building and loan, not a savings and loan. It's different.
Oh, building and loan.
And now here's all these kids, including a very teenaged Donna Reed.
But basically he sees Mary and is immediately smitten, and I love the exchange they have here. All the banter between them in these early scenes is so like well actualized. Like they feel like real people in a way that so much dialogue between the sexes could feel stilted in a certain way.
So much of it is just casting, right? It's the fact that Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed have really fucking good chemistry.
Yeah.
They play off each other's sense of humor really, really well. That's one of the biggest things.
And he doesn't commit to anything. He always kind of needs to be pushed into something because in part there's always this ambivalence of like, I really like her, but I am going to leave. I'm going away. We can't like do anything. I'm going to get out of here.
Right. And so, they enjoy dancing together at this high school graduation.
Yeah, he takes her away from Artie Ziff, and then he's like, I'm gonna open the new floor because it's a floor that's over a giant fucking Olympic swimming pool.
And
this is such a fun scene.
It's so fun because this is a real swimming pool at a real high school in Beverly Hills.
And it still exists.
It still exists. It's still there.
Wow. It's one of the two things that exists.
That gym can still be. I mean, just the idea too. It must be so weird that I just have so many questions about how you maintain something like that. Like, how do you?
Oh, that must be nuts.
How do you keep it from getting too humid?
Especially in the
place?
1920s. Like,
right?
Wow. Yeah, this is a really dangerous scene with a lot of stunts. I mean, people are diving into that pool because George becomes a trendsetter, and everyone decides that even the principal jumps into the pool.
That's a classic. Like the acting of the people behind the principal when he decides to jump in is it's so classic. Good. Like. I'm the goofy, like, stuffy old adult acting.
Woo! How dare you? Yeah, monocle falling out. But people are diving in like on top of other people. I just keep waiting to see like a head crash into another head.
Yeah, again.
But it's like these are trained professionals. It's okay.
It is so interesting how like so many people like go after Capra for being cliched, right? To like fall into sort of like hokey corniness. But
which he does sometimes.
Which he does, sure, sometimes. But he always finds a way to subvert it, at least to me. Like every time the romantic aspect of it gets a little bit too close, the floor opens underneath them, literally.
This section of the movie is a little long.
Is your issue with the dinner at home at all? Does that go on too long for you?
Because I don't know what... I don't have a specific part that I think is bad. I just think that like it needs some tightening up. They also sing Buffalo Gals too much. And it's not just that they sing Buffalo Gals too much. They sing the last line of Buffalo Gals too much. They always close it instead of leaving it open. And it's like, we just did it a minute ago.
I mean, they're setting up something that's going to pay off later on, and I get why they do it, but I agree that it belabors the point a little bit mechanically. Was I the only one who... as a kid, thought that Buffalo Gals was about like half human, half buffalo women?
Yes, you were, but that's fun. So
I didn't understand that song.
Yeah.
Josh, that's the most me thing you've ever said in your life. Oh no, I've infected
you. Now it's time for Josh's Buffalo Corner.
So when I was a kid, went to Yellowstone National Park.
Ooh.
And we were driving along the road,
Yeah.
and there was a traffic jam.
Oh.
And I was like, "What's going on? Why are we so slow? Are people just too busy looking at those geological reflecting pools?
All those yellow stones.
I said to myself, "Well, no. Turns out there was a buffalo on the side of the road." And the thing about a buffalo, actually, have either of you ever seen?
Yes, I've seen many buffalo.
I'm sure you have.
I did a choir tour in South Dakota in high school,
AJ, have
and
you ever
there
seen
was
a
a buffalo pen in Gallup for a little while. Yeah,
I've never seen one in person, but I do know that.
Hey, this is editing Brian. AJ does the buffalo joke. You know, the one where it's all one sentence and it all says buffalo 8 times. However, AJ said it 9 times, making it completely incomprehensible. So I had to cut it because we believe in facts here at the worst of all possible worlds. Merry Christmas, you old buffalo.
The thing about buffalo is that they are so big in a way that's hard to describe until you've seen one in person.
Very lean too, almost no fat. They are pure, like if you've ever eaten buffalo meat, that is just straight up muscle.
It's
really good.
And that, of course, is why you must be very careful around a buffalo. This has been Josh's Buffalo Corner.
Buffalo Corner. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, and so they go by this old mansion, right? As they're walking away, they got out of their wet clothes. He's wearing some ancient football uniform, and she's just got some kind of robe that he found from the locker room. Right. And they go by this very, very old, decrepit mansion that people throw rocks at, break windows at, to make a wish. You make a wish, you throw a rock, and if it breaks, then your wish will be granted. And so that's what they do. They break a couple windows and they make a couple wishes.
What'd you wish, George?
Well, not just one wish, a whole hatful. Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world. Italy, Greece, the Parthenon, the Colosseum. Then I'm coming back here and go to college and see what they know. And then I'm going to build things. I'm going to build airfields. I'm going to build skyscrapers 100 stories high. I'm going to build bridges a mile long. Well, you going to throw a rock?
Ow!
Hey, that's pretty good. What'd you wish, Mary?
If I told you, it might not come true.
What is it you want, Mary? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Hey, that's a pretty good idea. I'll give you the moon, Mary.
So this tells us who George is, right?
Yeah.
This is the whole thing that's animating him, and it's everything that he will never do.
Yeah.
So George is still talking to her, and there's a guy sitting on a porch who's just like, fucking kiss her.
I love it.
For God's sake.
And he has this great kind of, he doesn't say it right. Instead of saying youth is wasted on the young, he says youth is wasted on the wrong people. And he just goes back in his house. George gets so animated about how much he's going to kiss Mary that she kind of freaks out and tries to run off. But his foot is on the sash of her bathrobe and she becomes nude.
Yeah, we don't see her. But now she's in the hydrangea bush. She has become nude.
Yeah. And George decides to take this moment to be like, well, what a conundrum we got here. and walks around the bush taunting her. And again, right when you think this is going to be like, hydrangeas are coming in lovely this year. I don't know. So it's at that point that a car pulls up and says, hey, George, your dad's had a fucking stroke.
Right.
He has to go and deal with other things because George Bailey will never get the things that he thinks he wants. Mm-hmm. He will only ever get the things that he actually needs, which we can know that by pulling out and seeing it from like a heaven's eye view. But in the moment, he just gets fucking screwed over and over and over again.
So his dad dies.
Right when he wants to fucking screw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Screw.
And he ends up having to further defer his dream. Yeah. Take over the building and loan so that Potter doesn't fucking take over the whole thing.
Potter is willing to strip this thing for parts and turn the entire city into his ghetto. And you know what? George gives him the what fucking for.
That's right, Brian.
Wait a minute. Now, you're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny ante building and loan, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character because his whole life was, why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you'll ever be.
I'm not interested in your book. I'm talking about the building and loan.
I know very well what you're talking about. You're talking about something you can't get your fingers on, and it's galling you. That's what you're talking about, I know. Well, I've said too much. You're the board here. You do what you want with this thing. There's just one thing more, though. This town needs this measly one-horse institution, if only to have some place where people can come without crawling to Potter. Come on.
See, capitalism is the only way forward, but it's because capitalism can still have individuals in it, and individuals can still have morals. But if we somehow financialize an institution, financialize the whole system to a point that you disempower moral individuals from being able to operate, which capitalism does pretty efficiently, then it sows the seeds of its own destruction.
But something that I wanted to point up here as well is that in sort of the Capra view of things, that this populist view...
Capitalism.
That's right, Brian. Because it is individual moral agents who are choosing, they are choosing and benefiting a lot of people. There are still others who are going to be left out. This is something that is not explicitly noted in the film, of course, but Bedford Falls is pretty much an exclusively white town. And so the people who are gaining access to this capital are the people who George and the Baileys more broadly in the building and loan, it's going to be people who are already in or adjacent to that community, which means that people who are not in or adjacent to that community are going to be left out.
Yeah, we see it specifically, and maybe this is because the director is a little old Italian man himself. We see this little Italian man being able to buy his own home and live there with his family, and they do a big opening as they're building a whole new development in Bedford Falls. We do know that there are black people either in town or in the vicinity of the town, because of course we have the cook for the Baileys. We have in the alternate version of Bedford Falls, the piano, the bar becomes a piano bar, and there's a black man playing the piano. And there's also, if you pay attention in the background, you will see a few black people sitting in the background of that place. And you see a couple more black couples at the very, very, very end of the movie. So there is some appeal to being to the movie saying not only are Italian immigrants with goats in their backyard able to get a home when they are when they are investing with the Baileys, but there is also some benefit for black people, but it just also uses black people in a very 1940s shorthand way.
Yes,
that makes them almost completely invisible today.
Which was so strange because, as we said in that Why We Fight episode, Capra went out of his way to make an entire propaganda thing specifically for black soldiers.
Well, at this point,
which was handled very deftly. So it is disappointing to see it not.
It goes beyond the values of the director and the producers because, it turns out your morals don't beat the market. If you put prominent black people in your movie, you cannot play those movies in the South. There may even be northern states that you can't play it in, but this is one of the big things is Hollywood always capitulates to the fact it's well, if I can't run the movie in Alabama, then I'm just going to cut the scene that's going to be a problem. You as a moral individual with your independent feature film company could do something else and you don't. Frank Capra.
There is something about access to markets, right? That absent some sort of broader structural state level force there will always be people who are deprived of access to those markets.
Right. And it is so fascinating here, just for George Bailey's whole trajectory as a character, that he really comes into his own in this boardroom scene. He really is able to hyper articulate like the importance of the building and loan and go after Potter. And we see him slowly become the man he would at the end of the film as it goes along. And it's very effective arguing. I love when he says, "I've said too much, but like 9 more things now." And he keeps fucking going.
And it's because he's mean. It's because he is angry and starting to become bitter. And he's a good person who does good things, but he's also mean. And he's he's speaking from the heart. He shouldn't be saying all these things that he's saying, but he's saying them. And what it boils down to then is the board says the building and loan can stay, but we're not going to trust Uncle Baby Billy to run it. We're going to trust George to run it. You can't go to college. Right. So you couldn't trust Uncle Baby Billy because he kept misbehaving. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, oh God, Uncle Billy, there's a scene that comes up later in the film involving him that always destroys me. But he has little, we see that he has little like string tied around his fingers to help him remind him of things. Yeah, right. He's very forgetful.
He forgets to go to George's wedding.
He has a little crow friend. And if I could just take literally 3 minutes to talk about Jimmy the Crow.
Jimmy the Raven.
Yes, he was erroneously credited as Jimmy the Crow, but he is actually Jimmy the Raven.
This is Uncle Billy's pet crow.
Right. Yes,
the pet raven. And
this raven appeared in more than 1,000 feature films.
Yeah, including a number of Frank Capra movies,
including every Frank Capra movie from You Can't Take It With You on.
How long was this bird alive?
This bird was actively acting from 1938 to 1954.
Holy cow!
He was trained. He was a great bird. He was under the care of this guy named Curly Twyford.
That's not a real name.
I don't think you're allowed to say that, AJ.
Okay. He literally steals him from a nest that he finds in the Mojave Desert in 1934. And he teaches him to do a whole bunch of tricks. Apparently, according to Twyford, he could understand several hundred words, though by his estimation, only 50 were useful. He could perform any task that an 8-year-old child could. Jimmy Stewart had nothing but praise.
Any task that an 8-year-old child could. Like, 8-year-old children can probably like lift heavier things than a raven can.
Hey, Mr. Gower! It's that bottle is full of poison pills!
Gower goes over, slaps the shit out of the bird. No, Mr. Gower, I know it's because of your son!
Yeah. Billy has a couple of unusual animals. We see a squirrel later as well.
He's got a whole menagerie.
We have cut ahead a little bit. The stock market's crashing. George has sent his brother to college. He took that money that was meant for his world travel and his own education and gave it to his brother. And the agreement is that his brother will graduate, come back, and run the building and loan while George actually goes and gets his degree as well.
This does not happen.
No.
But what ends up happening instead is that Harry, goes off to school, meets his wife, realizes that there's a lot more of the world out there that he wants to see. So he is like, hey, man, I actually don't really, I've been offered a position with my wife's dad's company. I would rather do that if that's okay. And George just kind of sucks it up and is like, yeah, man, you do you.
Yeah, the moment he gets off the train and like they greet each other, they find out that he's married, they walk away. George is like, yeah, that's it. He's not coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you say he does suck it up, but he does get very drunk and very mean.
No, he's not happy about it. So George realizes because he's so upset in this moment, he's going to have to fucking stay at the building and loan. He's going to have to do all that. He realizes that what he really wants is to go see Mary.
But Josh, he doesn't though. He doesn't want to go see Mary. That's the whole thing, is that he's kind of just wandering about town and he's forced to see Mary.
Okay.
Yeah.
I sort of misread
on the
that
way
moment.
there is like, hey, Violet, you want to go out?
Right.
She doesn't like his way of doing things. He's not enough of a big city dude.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
she's like, no, I don't want to take my shoes off and walk through the grass with you, George.
Right. And so then he's like, well, I guess I'll go fucking see Mary, because why not?
Because my mom told me to.
And it turns out that they have still really electric chemistry. And as much of a cranky puss as George is being here, they have this moment where they are like listening to their friend on the phone. Yeah,
they're talking to Sam Hee-Haw Wainwright.
That's right.
And Wainwright is getting into some business, and he's like asking George for some tips on like where to set up manufacturing. And George is like, well, do it in Rochester. A bunch of factories closed down, so you've got a labor base there.
He realizes that, Mary and I actually really do kind of have a thing. They end up making out. They can't hold themselves back anymore.
Yeah.
Cut to them getting married. And that's it. George and Mary they're a couple now. And the thing that's interesting here is that, as you were saying, George is like, I think, committing emotionally to this choice, but he's still very frustrated with his lot in life. He doesn't fully want this, And that's even more clear than when there's a bank run on the building and loan. And he ends up spending all of his honeymoon money. He ends up taking all of that money and just paying it out to all of these people who need the money.
And it should be noted that it's $8,000.
Yeah.
Right. So the equivalent of almost $100,000 today.
It's a lot of fucking money.
And it's Mary who says, well, let's do this, because everyone has swarmed on the building and loan because they can't get their money out of the bank. They've run everything else. And basically there's this sort of arbitrary, like, if you're not open at 6 p.m., then Potter takes over.
Right.
So all they have to do is stay open one day. And this is interesting because a lot of building and loans were sort of naturally immune to a bank run because of the fact that even your low stakeholders could vote. What it meant was that people could come together and vote and say, we're going to freeze withdrawals. This also spelled doom for them, because then the big Mr. Potters who were invested in those building and loans were like, well, if I can't withdraw my money, I'm not going to continue to invest in these things in the future.
Right.
And then they become savings and loans, which then become these things that are romanticized by things like It's a Wonderful Life. And as a result, the government deregulates them to such an absurd degree that they become some of the most corrupt institutes that we have in the country. And to learn more about that, just listen to our episode about James Dobson interviewing Ted Bundy. And if you wonder, what does that have to do with it? You will not be able to guess, but it's pretty great.
Never has a holy mackerel been more ominous than in this, when George Bailey hears the news about the run on the banks happening, because, and again, there's something about like the old timey like slang that's used in this movie. Then the actors are so good that
hot dog,
that it really does, like, you almost forget that they're even saying these slang words.
Yeah,
like,
it feels authentic.
I also just want to call out the production design difference between George Bailey's office and Mr. Potter's office.
Yeah. Potter's office also has, like, if you sit down on the other side of the desk, you're sitting lower than him. They have Jimmy Stewart barely peeking over.
That tiny chair is such a good piece of set design.
Oh, it's so good.
And George's office never updates. It looks exactly the same in 1945 as it does in 1918. All of the light fixtures and the sconces and everything, the only difference is that they become more weathered with time. This is an expensive movie.
What they're doing with that money is they're putting it right back into the community, right?
Right.
George doesn't get the opportunity to go on a honeymoon, and so instead, his friends put him up in that old abandoned house that they threw the rocks into, and they have their honeymoon there instead.
That becomes their home,
right?
Because that's all that they can really afford now, because they just gave away all of their money to prevent the bank run, and there's $2 left of it. I will say, for that bank run sequence, when he owns everyone with facts and logic and keeps them contained so that they don't destroy the building and loan.
Yeah.
Watching the movie this time, this was the moment that really got to me.
Oh, interesting. Just the power of rhetoric.
Speechifying. Yeah. It's just like this really beautiful scene about like what people owe each other and what Capra really believes and what he's so afraid that the country is losing. And he's correct that the country is losing.
Like I said, all of that money, rather than going into George's office to make it fancy or whatever, that money goes right back into the community. There is a brand new suburban development that the building and loan is facilitating called Bailey Park. Old Mr. Martini, the Italian
Giuseppe Martini,
who owns the bar, He has bought a new house there. George and Mary have come by to drive them to their new place. This is getting people out of the slum and into the middle class.
Yeah.
This is
and
class
the slum
mobility.
is owned by Potter himself.
That's right. Meanwhile, childhood friend Sam, hee-haw guy, he's into plastics. He is growing his wealth and he's going to become an industry magnate. Potter, in response, brings George back into his office to pitch him on working for him. And he's like, hey, man, you're making $45 a week right now. What if I gave you $20,000 a year? After some period of time, George declines the offer, chews Potter the fuck out again.
And takes the cigar.
That's right. And this is another one of those inflection points that you were mentioning, AJ, that propel us forward in time, because there's a big time jump again. We go through the entire war.
Yeah.
We get more exposition. Harry, George's brother, gets a Medal of Honor for valor in combat.
Shoots down kamikaze pilots, saves an entire ship of people. We hear it's very like our town. We hear of all the different people in town who went to the war. And of course, George is deaf in one ear. He could not fight. So instead, he gets into the civil air patrol and he helps get people to dump all of their tires for military purposes and all of that kind of stuff.
And everybody kicks in the community.
Yeah.
And it's all wrapped up in the war effort because, as we talked about with Why We Fight, this is core to Frank Capra's idea of what it is that makes us good. That we all come together as a community to support our local communities as well as our national community.
And during this time, George also has a bunch of kids.
Violet was the other girl who liked George. She's the one that he kind of wanted to go on a date with. She's a big slut.
Yep.
Like that's kind of the whole thing. And George is sort of saving her from a life of slutdom.
Exactly. Yeah. She was along with Mary, one of the two little girls who was in the soda shop all the way back in the day. Right. And they've gone their separate ways. Mary has become the chaste wife. Yeah. Violet has become the huge slut. He can only save one, George.
Truly the dark knight of the Capra universe.
Yeah. Which, we could talk for a very long time about the attendant, gender politics of how like the good man can only save one woman. But he does.
He actually saves both.
He saves both of them.
Yeah.
He does. Sam's business continues to grow because he's able to provide plastics to the military for use in military airplane cockpits. And all of this big time jump takes us forward to the big dramatic inflection point of this film. And so we'll find out about that dramatic inflection point and everything that transpires after, right after this.
Caw-caw, worst of all possible worlds, listeners. Jimmy the Raven here, a star of over 1,000 pictures, and that bird what's been stealing your keys while you weren't looking. If you didn't want them stolen, why'd you make them so dang shiny? Now, listeners, do you like birds? And I'm not talking about those dang cockatoos with their newfangled feathers all willy-nilly or peacocks who are just right out. No, I'm talking about those salt-of-the-earth birds who can understand up to 80 words, 8 of them usable. Yes, my friends, I'm talking about a good old-fashioned raven like yours truly. Now, I hear you telling me through this newfangled contraption that's got all the worms that shock you. Wires, you call them. Look here, Mr. the Raven. I could get a dog or a cat or a tortoise, and it would do me as well as any pet. Well, you listen here, mister. Can your tortoise open a door? Can your dog instill in its children a keen sense of revenge over a person who once wronged them? Can your cat call out to wolves to open up an animal carcass for them so that their little beaks get all the tasty meats inside? Yeah, I thought not. You silly, stupid slut. You know, listeners, this reminds me of a little story. I was on the set of The Wizard of Oz, that's right. Yours truly played the crow that landed on the scarecrow's shoulder. Now, Ray Bolger, he was a card. One day he asked for a sandwich, and somebody brought him a salad instead. And he looked at that salad and said, and I'll never forget this, swear on my life, he said, "Life is so very long. And death so very, very far away. So go get a raven today so everyone on your block will think you're a warlock and leave you the heck alone. Ravens, that's so me."
Okay, we're back. We are back in Bedford Falls. And boy, it sure does, because Uncle Baby Billy has made it to the bank. He's looking at a newspaper, looking at how great the war heroism of George Bailey's brother is, Harry Bailey.
Got a Medal of Honor.
That's right.
Yeah, he's going to get honored by the president. He sees Potter at the bank and he starts bragging to him about how great the Baileys are doing and how Potter couldn't keep them down, and go fuck yourself, you old bitch. And after his little gloat session, he puts the newspaper down. He goes to deposit a huge sum of money that is needed to keep, of course, the building and loan afloat. Your usual sort of transaction, the kind of thing that Uncle Baby Billy, through all his forgetfulness and drunkenness, has made 100 times before.
Well, this is the problem, is he's too busy running around the house with a pickle in his mouth.
Yes.
That he doesn't notice the fact that he has left that envelope with the daily deposit, or maybe even weekly or monthly deposit. It's a lot of cash in that fucking newspaper.
And so Potter now has the money. This scene always breaks my heart. When he realizes it's gone, that he's lost the money, it is devastating.
Have either of you guys ever lost an envelope containing a significant amount of cash? Because I have.
I sure haven't. No,
I have not. No, not. I've lost things, but I've never lost a gigantic sum of money on its own.
When was this? About a decade ago, I want to say, I just had to run some cash. Like, I had to withdraw some cash from one place and then deposit it. And I walked across Times Square with an envelope in my pocket with $1,000 in cash, which I needed for rent that month. And I dropped the envelope.
Oh no!
I assume. I don't know what happened to the envelope. Maybe somebody pickpocketed me. But
sure.
I distinctly remember I have had this feeling myself. The literal feeling of envelope full of cash. Fuck, where did it go?
Folks, you would not believe the things that Josh leaves at my apartment after we record.
Oh, yeah. Dildos, AJ.
Dildos in AJ?
That's right.
AJ in dildos?
Yeah, that was the really weird one.
Help me.
How do you do that?
Very carefully.
I'm still doing it right now.
Oh, come on. But like, I distinctly recall the thing of like, fuck. And I needed that money for rent at the end of the month. And so I ended up going back to work, and I was just like, I have lost all of the money that I need to make ends meet this month. And thankfully my supervisor was able to...
Was this a job that just paid you cash? What job was this?
They didn't pay me cash, but I don't remember why it was. This was also 10 years ago. You needed to use cash for things more than you do now.
Sure. Definitely. Especially in New York.
Exactly.
There are just a lot of... It's a weird town.
Yeah. And so I distinctly remember then that I had to ask the supervisor for like, oh God, what can I do? And she was able to help me with like signing up for a bunch of extra shifts to get a bunch of overtime. And I was able to make all of that money back over the course of the next week or so, just with overtime pay. This is one of the benefits of having a union job. I will say that. But yeah, that's my lost an envelope of money story.
Yeah, no, I used to have to transfer money when I worked on the cruise ship. I would take my money out of, they paid it on like a ship account, so it could be like an offshore account. So I would take the money out of the ATM and then walk through the streets of Miami to deposit it in the Bank of America thing. And it always makes you feel like you have like this. I was so nervous every single time. Like I always thought there was like a mark on my back, and everyone would like know, and they would be able to get it. And you see that sort of anxiety the minute that Billy realizes that it's gone.
Yeah. It's interesting to see a depiction of what we would easily call neurodivergence today, right?
Sure.
This is a man with attention deficit disorder.
Yes.
Right? He just forgets things.
And it's not his just fault. Like me for real.
Yeah, his brain just doesn't work. Like I said, Josh leaves all kinds of shit here. I've got one of your dongles on my desk.
That's what he calls his favorite dildo.
You know, the little dongles that let you hook up real headphones to your stupid fucking phone because they took the jack out and they cost like $70. I have one of these because Josh was fiddling with it during a recording session and then was like, I don't remember that exists.
And was gone.
No,
leaving me, the dongle, and a giant pile of dildos behind.
Just one huge dildo AJ was inside of.
The other thing that I think is really interesting about this movie is that it's not just lost money. They could have had Billy just drop it in the snow somewhere and then you never find it because that's a thing that happens in real life.
Sure.
But no, it was in that newspaper. And Mr. Potter has the newspaper.
Yeah, he steals it. He steals the money straight
and he
up.
has a moment of like, oh, that fucking idiot. Let's bring it back. And then as he sees Billy leave, he's like, well, I did all I could.
Yep.
Fuck it.
Yep.
Let him burn. He has finally crossed the line into just full lawlessness. He is going to destroy the building and loan by committing grand larceny in a way that will never be caught. I think that's really interesting because usually with the Hays Code, you have to get caught. You have to pay for your
punished.
crime.
Yeah, but guys like Potter don't get punished.
Exactly.
It's another way that this movie like really leans on the truth of the situation because Potter gets off of all of this scot-free. Spoilers for It's a Wonderful Life.
I mean, sometimes, you know, when you do things like this, there's some sort of karmic retribution. Like you might be walking out of your hotel on Central Park West and, you know, somebody might run up to you and sort of take care of business, shall we say.
Sure.
Yeah, he loses the silent assassin modifier because there's a witness, but he's able to get away.
Because the other thing here, too, is that this movie is not focused on the consequences of bad actions, right?
Yeah.
It is only focused on the consequences of good and kind actions, which I think is interesting. And I think it's what kind of keeps it from feeling like a morality play.
Yeah.
Right, because there is no, even though it gets kind of preposterous at the end, it does not also turn around and say, oh, and mean old Mr. Potter, we're going to kill you in front of a hotel.
Right.
You're dead now. You're a dead bitch.
Right.
Yes. That never happens, mostly because dead bitch was not allowed under the Hays Code. But
Living bitch?
Living bitch?
Totally acceptable.
All the time. That was most
All
of Jimmy.
your bitches must be living at the end of the film. Uncle Baby Billy has run back to the building and loan.
Yep.
And he's like, here's the horrible, desperate situation that we're in now. And George isn't happy at first, but he's like, okay, you know, solutions.
Right.
We go down the road, we dig through the snow, we cross the street, we go every single place that you have gone. And Billy just becomes more and more frantic and he runs into his office and he's ransacking it and his squirrel is very nervous. And at this point, once it's become clear that they're not going to find this money, George fucking loses it on Uncle Billy.
And did you put the envelope in your pocket?
Yeah,
All right.
no, maybe.
Maybe. I don't want any maybe. We've got to find that money.
I'm no good to you.
Uncle Billy, look, do you realize what's going to happen if we don't find it? Listen to me. Do you have any secret hiding place here in the house? Someplace you'd hide the money.
I've gone over the whole house, even in rooms that have been locked since I lost Laura.
Listen to me. Think.
I can't think anymore, George. I can't think anymore. It hurts.
Where's that money, you silly, stupid old fool? Where's that money? Do you realize what this means? It means bankruptcy and scandal and prison. That's what it means. One of us is going to jail. Well, it's not going to be me.
You know, obviously because of the Hays Code, he couldn't call him a stupid son of a bitch, but it hits as if he did.
It's his uncle. He's a very sweet old man that George has known all his life and who's never done like a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think the performance really gets that across in this too. There's something about that feels almost improvised by some of it, like Jimmy Stewart like doubling back over lines or like stopping midway through, and then also just the I can't think anymore, George. Yeah, like I've been there too, where like I am being yelled at and I'm like I can't respond right now because my brain is completely shut down.
Yeah. I can't think. I cannot think. It hurts.
It hurts.
And it just ends with him, alone. George is like, you will go to jail. Like, if it comes down to it, I will tell on you, which he doesn't do.
Right.
Because he goes to Potter later and doesn't do that.
He says it's his own fault. He lost the money. Yeah. The whole reason that he's in such disarray, like it's not just that the money's been lost, it's that there's an auditor on site.
Plus, Potter knows.
Right.
All of this is going on because he has the money. So he's already making phone calls to like the DA and shit like that.
And of course, George doesn't know that Potter knows. There's dramatic irony here. But when George gets home, he just takes it out on his family.
It's all just become too much for him. His youngest daughter is sick. He's called her teacher on the phone and like chewed her out, and her husband gets on the phone and is like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. He's like, okay, come to my address, motherfucker. And his one daughter is also like practicing Hark the Herald Angels Sing on the piano the entire time.
Over again.
And it's very regimented, right?
It's a kid practicing piano.
The way this scene is constructed, I think, is masterful.
It's really good.
But not only just because of the build of it, but because at a certain point, George just keeps contradicting himself over the course of it.
And here's just the last part of him just absolutely going nuts.
Dad, how do you spell hallelujah?
How should I know? What do you think I am, a dictionary? Tommy, stop that, stop it. Janie, haven't you learned that silly tune yet? You play it over and over again. Now stop it, stop it.
These are like dioramas that he's tearing down.
I'm sorry, Mary. Janie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. You go on and practice. Pete, I owe you an apology, too. I'm sorry. What do you want to know?
Nothing, Daddy.
What's the matter with everybody? Janie, go on. I told you to practice. Now go on, play.
Oh, Daddy. George, why must you torture the children? Why don't you...
Mary.
And she can't say it, like, why don't you just leave? But that's what she means, and that's what he does.
Yeah. You see them cower away from him, too.
Yeah, a lot of this is visual.
This is a really long scene. It's him going through every room of his house, going upstairs and downstairs and having private conversations, and then it stops being private. And
Zuzu just wants to stay awake and look at her flower. I fucking love that
Great
delivery.
fucking acting from her there. Yeah, for sure.
And that moment where he apologizes, that could be the end of the scene and he walks out of the house then. But no, then he gets, belligerent. No, we're going to have a good time.
Right.
Let's all get back to normal.
That's right.
I screwed up. Play the piano again. Come on.
He does not ultimately hate his kids, his wife, anything like that. He is just in a doom spiral in his own head, which no longer allows him to see the world around him for what it is and remember the things that he loves about it, which is, I think, a universally relatable experience.
And the reason why we have seen all of these events of his life up until this point is so that we can see all of the many regrets that he has.
Right.
And all of the things that he could have done but hasn't done, and all of the things that bind him to Bedford Falls.
And this is like such a relatable experience too, of being like, God, as I was watching this, I just had so many, because I didn't mention at the beginning of this episode, like we watched this movie with some frequency growing up. Yeah. But weirdly, I didn't remember very much about it other than the last part, which we're going to get to.
You don't
the part with
really
the angel.
watch Christmas movies. They're kind of on while you're doing other stuff and you're not paying, full attention to them. And so when you really sit down with them and watch them beginning to end.
Right.
Yeah. And especially this one, you're like, holy shit.
This is a movie that really takes its time with its pacing to sort of build the world so that the emotional stakes make sense. Mm-hmm. And I have had so many experiences in my lowest points where I have just been like, every single thing that I've done up until this point has been a huge fucking mistake. I regret not trying this. I regret not trying that. I need to go hang everything up, leave everybody forever, and move to a cabin in Finland. And that will fix me, right? Like it's just, he makes a last ditch plea, right? George runs out, goes right to Potter and is like, look, you gotta help me. I'm in over my head. I normally wouldn't do this, but you gotta help me, man. And then Potter finally tells George how he really feels about him.
You used to be so cocky. You were going to go out and conquer the world. You once called me a warped, frustrated old man. What are you with a warped, frustrated young man? A miserable little clerk crawling in here on your hands and knees and begging for help. No securities, no stocks, no bonds, nothing but a miserable little $500 equity and a life insurance policy. You're worth more dead than alive. Why don't you go to the riffraff you love so much and ask them to let you have $8,000? You know why? Because they'd run you out of town on a rail.
And then he expedites the process and he's like, I'm going to file a formal criminal complaint against you right this very second. He starts dialing the phone because Yeah, it's not just George has a lot of regrets. George is stuck living in a drafty house that's worth about $5. It's not that George hasn't seen the world. It's like he has done all of this for one reason, and that's to keep the community going and to keep the building and loan alive. And now it's not only is it going to be gone, he's going to be in prison, leaving a single non-working wife behind with 1 million children.
Yeah.
Not only was it like, oh yeah, I regret not doing certain things from my past. It's I made the wrong choice.
Exactly.
It's all led to disaster now.
Ultimately, the question that this movie is asking is, what is the point of you as a person? And that is, I think, something that I think was a universal experience during the pandemic, especially. And George tries every avenue to sort of get out of this doom spiral. And the fact that this happens over the course of a day is just masterful storytelling, frankly, that it can feel like he has no way out. He goes to a bar, he goes to Martini's to get a drink, and he doesn't find answers there at all. In fact,
the school teacher's husband is there and punches the shit out of him. Yeah.
Just think about that school teacher's day. She's having a pretty good day. Let's all the little kids are going to get a nice flower to take home.
Right.
And then you get called up by George Bailey, who's like, you're a bitch. You sent my child home nude. You got her sick from walking in the cold because she had her jacket open because you didn't want to destroy her flower. How dare you? And then she's sobbing. My wife is sobbing. And her husband gets on the phone and he's belligerent. He's like, I'm going to sock you a good one, you motherfucker. And she's like, please don't do this. Please don't embarrass me. And then her husband storms off while she's presumably still just crying at home.
Goes off to the bar.
And he just goes to drink. He's like, fuck it. I'm tired of how you're being treated. I'm going to go drink alone and leave you here.
You know, here's the thing. George deserves that punch.
George deserves it.
Absolutely.
And it's one final thing.
Yes.
It's like, he literally gets knocked on his ass.
Yep. So and then he goes out, he drives drunk, he crashes into a tree, and then he decides that he's going to go throw himself off a bridge so that his family can collect on his life insurance policy, which has enough money in it that it could theoretically save the building and loan. Now, obviously, this would be voided because it's a fucking suicide, but he's not thinking at this point. He's going purely on impulse.
But I also think because the bridge is where it is, it could be like said that he got drunk and fell into a river.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It's not like a clear gun to the head kind of
It's
suicide.
not Willie Loman driving straight into the water. And I think this is important for this last act of the movie. He's really drunk.
Yes.
Yeah,
he's
very
drunk.
very
drunk, which is why he never has any clue. Usually you have a character when a supernatural thing happens in a story, they're like, what's happening? And they lean on it too much. But for him, it's because he's still like wasted.
Yeah.
So he doesn't realize that the bar is completely different when he shows up again.
But it turns out that somebody beats him to the punch of jumping off the bridge.
And that is Clarence.
Yeah.
That's our little odd body Clarence.
I'm going to drop down from the ceiling of the universe.
That's right.
And I'm going to save George. And he overshoots a little and falls right into the river.
And there's a guy who is working as the, bridge attendant or whatever. He's got his little
guy.
The bridge swain.
Yeah.
I love the bridge swain. I love the bit. They keep like teasing a spit take. With his tobacco.
Because he's got his tobacco
but he does the opposite.
He does an opposite spit take and it's so good.
George is gone and jumped off the bridge, not to kill himself, but to save Clarence.
Yeah, an expert dive.
That's right. He successfully swims. He successfully grabs Clarence. He successfully comes to shore. The bridge swain, puts them up in his cabin. They warm up. He swains them. They are fully swun. George is sobering up a bit, but he's still quite drunk.
Yeah.
And he's like, I wish I was never born. And Clarence is like, okay, sure, you got it. You've never been born. And the remainder of this portion of the movie is George walking around town and nobody knows who he is because he doesn't exist anymore.
This is a movie that is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. The section that is the whole thing that people think of when they think of It's a Wonderful Life is 20 minutes.
Yeah. It's almost like a play within a play.
Yeah, it's like, okay, here was this whole movie, and now we're finishing up with an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Mm-hmm. But also that, like, it shouldn't be any longer than 20 minutes.
No, it hits exactly the points that it should, yeah.
First of all, Bedford Falls is gone, right? Mm-hmm. It's Pottersville now. They got neon and jazz, baby.
The whole town, the main drag is just a full-on, like, den of iniquity. It's hookers and jazz as far as the eye can see.
It's straight up just burlesques and pawn shops.
Yeah. We go to Martini's, where Nick is now
That's right.
over.
It's
Martini's
not called
son.
Martini's anymore. It's called Nick's because we end up learning that Martini, well, he didn't make it because he came upon some hardship and he wasn't able to overcome that hardship because he was stuck in one of those fucking rental hovels thanks to Potter. And he just fucking died.
So, and Nick is a sterling, wonderful Italian-American man. And here he is quite rude.
Yes.
He is a business owner himself, but here's him just reacting to Clarence, who is a man from like 1840 who like made watches and then died before the Civil War, trying to figure out how to order a drink in the far-flung future of 1945.
I was just thinking, it's been so long since
Look, mister, I'm standing here waiting for you to make up your mind.
That's a good man. I was just thinking of a flaming rum punch. No, it's not cold enough for that. Not nearly cold enough. Wait a minute. I got it. Mulled wine, heavy on the cinnamon and light on the cloves. Off with you, me lad, and be lively.
Hey, look, mister. We save hard drinks in here for men who want to get drunk fast, and we don't need any characters around to give the joint atmosphere. Is that clear? Or do I have to slip you my lip for a convincer?
What are you talking about? Nick. Just give him the same as mine. He's okay.
Okay.
What's the matter with him? Never saw Nick act like that before.
You'd see a lot of strange things from now on.
In the sort of pre-world, the way that it is when it's still not Grover's Corners. I wanted to say Grover's Corners.
It's also that. Basically, yeah.
It's a bit more, I don't know, sedate. This is a place where people come for a few drinks and they probably get a bit drunk, whereas, and that's what Martini's is. Nick's, on the other hand, is a place where people come to get fucking shwasted.
Yeah.
Like we said, there's a guy who's playing the piano. He's a black
he's got
guy.
a bowler hat and a cigar.
He's playing that ragtime, you know. Yeah. This is showing us in shorthand that, like, this is now a morally decrepit place. There's even a moment where Nick, like, basically calls him a couple of puffs and throws him out of the bar. Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
And there's also a point where Mr. Gower comes in. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Gower has been... he has served a prison sentence for 20 years, and now he's just some elderly vagrant because he poisoned that kid.
Right.
Yeah, because George wasn't there to stop him.
The way that Gower shows up in this scene, right? Because he enters the bar and it goes quiet immediately because everybody sees him. This man is persona non grata everywhere he goes.
He murdered a child.
He killed a kid. Accidental death.
And they don't know
that's accidental. He could have been, a psycho killer.
Exactly. Qu'est-ce que c'est? And they're trying to make him run far, far away.
Yeah.
I think this might be the strongest dramatic moment in the film that is not specifically a Jimmy Stewart moment.
Again, you talk about the runtime, and that probably is a factor in why it wasn't so popular, because it's a slow movie. Mm-hmm. But it gets to a point where you kind of forgot about that part.
Yeah. And then you just realize he hasn't shown up in like an hour at least.
Yeah, that thing from like scene 2 of the movie changed the trajectory of a huge part of the town, because then you don't even have your local drugstore anymore.
Right. But it's also like that's sort of the whole point that Capra's making, which is just like you have affected people in a way you can't even remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. This small event from childhood could actually like completely alter the formation of a town.
Which goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of our episode, AJ, about how like there is a reason that those time skips happen after these moments. It is helping you as the viewer kind of plant a flag, and those flags each get pulled sort of back up again as we reach these beats in the film. Another one of these beats is that we run across Violet once we're in town. She is fully out of control of her own life. She has given herself over to an immoral lifestyle.
Yeah. George is running through town, and now he's like, okay, I'm going to hit every beat. Which thing is going on? We haven't talked about Bert and Ernie.
Yeah, we haven't.
The gay cop and the gay taxi driver.
Oh, that's right. Cop taxi driver combo.
And they do kiss. Well, one kisses the other, and then the other one hits his hat because he's like, I don't know what that is.
That's right.
I've never learned what gay is.
Bert and Ernie, earlier in the film, when there's the honeymoon, they're really the two who facilitate that whole situation.
Yeah, they sing, this is the night, it's a beautiful night on this lovely bella notte.
And they set up they put posters in the wall, in the windows that are of like these far-flung locations. For some reason, I had completely forgotten that this was like Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. Very clearly, they pulled the names from this.
Apparently not.
Really?
No,
so
it's a complete
the same thing as like Kermit Love not actually being Kermit's namesake. They just named the characters Bert and Ernie, and then someone pointed it out, and they were like, maybe
it was something that was embedded in the You know?
I mean, that's the thing about
everyone
this movie.
knows two ambiguously gay guys named Ernest and Bert.
Yeah, Bertram.
But he goes back to his old place, right? It's George Bailey goes back to their the old house that they fixed up. Obviously, he was never born, so it was never fixed up.
It's just a derelict
and
now.
It's in camera in a unique way because they get there, the cabbie drives him over, and he's like, you gotta watch this guy. And the police officer takes the car-mounted spotlight, shines it in the house, and that is what is lighting the scene. So as Jimmy Stewart is going from one room to the next, the light follows him into each room as a sort of fake practical. It's really cool.
It's also one of those things of like, yeah, we were still kind of figuring out what movies were at this point.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can see from the editing in this movie, which is sometimes just like, well, we're moving on to the next shot. Like some scenes don't have coverage, so they just sort of jump cut.
But yeah, the lighting in this universe, I think, is so cool and so stark. And it's slowly over the course of it.
There's a lot of neon?
Yeah. It slowly becomes more and more like a Hitchcock movie as it goes along.
Oh, my God.
You're talking about Jimmy Stewart running down the street when he's seeing the pawn shops and everything. That's full Hitchcock.
As is the shot, the close shot that we get on his face where he's like looking from side to side.
And he looks straight into the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, after seeing that his mom is operating a boarding house.
Right.
Right. That's not his house, it's his mom's house.
What is happening? And he looks like side to side, and the camera is right there. A thing about this that I picked up this time that I had missed before, I had always wondered why Clarence is reading a copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Just as opposed to like Americana in general. And I think, this is my theory now, is that it's because Tom and Huck get to see their own funerals.
Sure.
Oh, interesting.
And to see a world without
that would make sense.
them.
That would make sense, yeah.
That is the one parallel I could see.
There's also the fact that he implies that he knows Mark Twain now.
Yeah,
he says like the book that he's working on right now is really good.
Yeah, it's to date him as well.
No, I mean, he knows him in heaven.
No, I know. But I was saying like, I think that it's also with the intention of dating where Clarence comes from in time.
Yeah, so he's actually a late 19th century man.
The thing that really gets George kind of over the line in terms of realizing how much he wants to live and realizing like what about his life he missed is really twofold. The first piece is that he goes to the cemetery, and it turns out that the cemetery is at the location where otherwise his development would have been built, that housing development.
Yeah, because all those houses don't exist. Everyone just lives in Potter's slum. This is a whole town just owned by Potter.
It's called Potterstown.
And this whole scene is so beautifully recreated in Back to the Future 2.
Yeah.
Even with the wind and everything.
I don't know why I never noticed. I've seen Back to the Future 2 a lot of times, and it was only this time around. It's like, oh, they just fucking took It's a Wonderful Life and did the whole thing.
Just for everyone to know, including you, Josh, because I don't think you know this, AJ has seen the first and third Back to the Futures, and he has not seen the second one.
What?
I have been so thoroughly owned.
The second one is arguably the best in a number of ways. I mean, the first one is the best, but
the second one has the most just like fun time travel-y bits in it.
Yes.
I think.
Okay.
I love the way the future looks. I love, just the jumping back and forth, the alternate history stuff. Marty's mom's enormous cans.
And then the third one is just a Western, so your mileage may vary, but the train is cool. Yep. So anyway, he sees in this graveyard a headstone for his brother, Harry.
Who died as a child.
Drowning in that pond. He didn't get the opportunity to become a World War II flying ace.
Yep, that whole boat that he saved didn't get saved.
Right.
Thousands of men died in the Pacific because he wasn't there to shoot down the kamikaze pilot.
And of course, this is where Clarence gets the money line. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. And this makes George be like, well, shit, I need to know what happened to Mary.
Yeah.
And it turns out that she didn't get married at all. She is now a spinster who works at the library.
A fate worse than death.
Yeah, it's not the worst outcome as far as the people that we've been seeing. And this more just becomes about the drama of George meeting her and it being just genuinely terrifying to this woman who does not know him.
Harrowing the way that this is staged, because he like runs up to her, grabs her, and
he says, I'm married to you.
and she, understandably, because this man does not actually exist, thinks that she is about to get kidnapped or assaulted or who knows what, screams, runs away. This is what finally gets the cops, who, by the way, have been trailing him this entire time, to fully like try to arrest him.
And then George punches him in the face.
And flees. He runs back to the bridge.
At this point, George knows that there's a Clarence situation going. He's finally like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the universe where I wasn't born. Let's switch it back.
So he
Let
prays,
me just punch a cop and find Clarence. Yeah.
Yep. Prays on the bridge.
Yep.
Then he shifts right back again.
The snow starts falling.
Snow starts falling, and Bert, who in the bad world has been trailing him to arrest him, spots him on the bridge, and this happens.
Hey, George! George! You all right? Hey, what's the matter?
Now get out of here, Bert, or I'll hit you again. Get out.
What the Sam Hill you yelling for, George?
George. Bert, do you know me?
Know you? You kidding? I've been looking all over town trying to find you. I saw your car piled into that tree down there, and I thought maybe you... Hey, your mouth's bleeding. Are you sure you're all right?
What you... My mouth's bleeding, Bert! My mouth's bleeding! Zoot petals! Zoot... There they are!
He finds her flower petals in his pocket.
What do you know about this? Merry Christmas!
Well, Merry Christmas!
Merry! Yay!
This is him seeing his car in a tree.
His crashed car. Yeah.
Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!
So half the people are like, this guy's insane. Half the people are like, hey, it's George.
He's really happy for some reason.
Merry Christmas, Emporium! Merry Christmas, you wonderful old building and loan!
I love that fucking line, because the whole time he has fought against this. Fought against
it. He hates the building and loan.
And here's the thing. He kind of still does.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he doesn't also love it, because it means that he's back in his own world. I love the timing of the yas as he discovers more and more things are normal again. It's so perfectly paced. Like, and you feel the jubilation, because by this point, you also love George Bailey. Like, you also want him to be okay. And so the fact that he is, well, almost is, because he's still going to jail.
Yes. And as he finds Mr. Potter just spending the evening hours on Christmas Eve in his office, the only place that he's ever found in town.
It's a real Ebenezer Scrooge, this guy.
He shouts through the window.
Hey! Merry Christmas, Mr. Potter! Happy New Year to you! In jail! Go on home, they're waiting for you.
Yes!
And they are. There's like there's a journalist who's like got his like fucking Graflex in hand to take a picture of him.
George
walk that guy.
Gets home, he runs up and down the stairs. He's like, I'm going to jail! Hooray!
He's hugging all of his kids. All the kids have forgiven him, and it turns out that Mary had like gone out looking for him with Uncle Billy, because the reaction to like his meltdown isn't he's dangerous. It's more that he is a danger to himself, and we are worried about him.
And this, of course, is then also the payoff to the very, very beginning of the movie, where everybody's praying for him. That is what has been going on throughout this period of time that George has been transported to the pocket dimension.
Yeah, even that teacher's husband was praying for him. He's like, I dear God, I really hope that he fucking feels it tomorrow.
And, you know, everybody in town has now heard about what's going on.
Yeah.
They all come into the, I was about to say the Barclay house. I hate myself
I've been
so
trying to
much.
avoid saying Barclay this whole time, and I don't know if I've been successful.
I am free of this burden.
Until
embrace
next
it.
week.
Yeah.
Turns out that everybody in town has gotten together whatever dollars and pennies they have.
Yeah.
They just sort of dump all their money on the table. And then we get a telegram from Sam.
Hee-haw.
Hee-haw himself. He is willing to advance up to $25,000, which is like over $500,000 in modern money from that plastics concern to cover the shortfall.
Ben, I'm going to say one word to you. Just one word. Plastics.
Yeah. I'm going to say one word to you. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Hee-haw.
We've also overlooked that Martini, he break the jukebox. He break the jukebox and he puts all the coins on the table. So, that also helped Martini helped, okay? Italian Americans have contributed to this country.
And when you understand that, this is not a bank, this makes a lot more sense. Because I was like, wait, why would everybody be like giving money for a shortfall that happened because of a problem at a bank? But if it is a community trust, then it makes sense because like this is, by doing this, they are keeping, not only are they obviously helping George, who they care a lot about, they are also keeping their own shares solvent.
And Violet reveals that she's not going to New York. She's staying in town. He can keep the money. And a big part of why building and loans were able to be defeated by their investors is because if you're just using that investment to get your home paid off, that means once your home is paid off, you're not invested anymore.
That's right. They buy your equity back.
So the only people who are left are the people who have that profit-seeking stake in the building and loan.
Right.
And so they're able to get rid of it, essentially.
Yeah.
But this final moment is a direct callback to when George gave up his honeymoon money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now the community is coming to pay him back.
Including the guy who withdrew all of his money, right? There was one person who still was like, I'm going to take all of it. He shows up and he drops cash in the basket.
And, their old cook comes back and throws money in for the briefest of cameos.
I think she said, I was saving up for a divorce in case I ever got married, but it goes by so fast that I wasn't quite sure.
That is a great line. That is an incredible line.
In general, like what they give her is not the best, owing to the attendant prejudices of the time, but she is doing the most with what she's got.
It's also not the worst.
For sure.
and then they all start singing Auld Lang Syne, but not before Harry comes back.
Right.
Harry's here.
He's got his pilot hat on, the whole thing.
He took a red-eye train from Washington, D.C. He left his big dinner with the President of the United States.
Yeah.
To be with his brother, who had sacrificed so much so that he could have the life that he had.
Clarence has left his copy of Mark Twain with George.
He's personalized it and signed it.
The bell on the Christmas tree, one of the ornaments rings, and Zuzu, his daughter, says, "Oh, my teacher says that every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings." And George is like, "Well, I still have a problem with your teacher. Don't bring her up in my home." But no, he's like, "Oh yeah, Clarence, you did it. You got your wings."
That's your wings.
And does a little wink toward the sky.
Yeah.
And
then we get a big bell ringing because it's Liberty Pictures.
So many. Do you know how many angels must have gotten their wings just from the reruns of this movie over the years?
I will say, I forgot to mention that there's that moment in the pocket dimension where Nick he hears about the angels getting their wings thing, and then after he's kicked them out of the bar to make fun of them, he's like, "Hey guys, check this out. A whole bunch of angels are getting their wings." And he's pulling the thing on the cash register to make it ding. This is the 20 minutes that everybody remembers.
Yeah.
But what was startling to me going back to this film is how much more there is to it.
Yeah.
That it's, that of course is the piece that has lived on in our culture that we talk about. This thing of like, oh yeah, it's very similar to A Christmas Carol, where it's like
just from the other side. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot in there about how Frank Capra believes that the world ought to be structured and ordered.
Buy local.
Right. Yes.
Invest in co-ops.
That's right. With a great deal of optimism for what this country could look like post World War II. And it goes without saying that right now we are in a period where optimism is hard to come by. And so I guess I'm just wondering like how you guys felt after getting through this, after watching this. Did you feel inspired? Did you feel like there's anything that you can take away from it? Or did you just feel like, well, it sure must have been nice to be alive in 1947?
I did not get the sense that it was nice to be alive at that point.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the magic trick of this movie, is that it never shies away from how hard it was.
Yeah, and the past was miserable.
Yeah, and the problems of it, but that there was an optimistic way forward anyway.
Yeah.
And I think the thing I most took away from it was, no matter how dire the situation, and I want to be very clear, our situation is incredibly dire right now.
Yeah.
There is hope in the smaller communities. There is hope that the Potters can try to have their influence infiltrate every aspect of your life, but there are ways to insulate yourself from that. And the ways to do that is to come together as a community to help each other. That is what makes this movie timeless, is because there will always be a Potter. Potter is immortal in this movie, right? For all intents and purposes, there will always be a guy like Potter, but that doesn't mean that we can't come together to fight back against it.
Yeah, this movie was flagged as communist propaganda by the FBI because the banker is a bad guy. Again, just shows how fucking stupid everyone is all the time. This is a capitalist movie by a Republican.
This is not a socialist film.
This is a guy who didn't vote for FDR. Even going that far.
Although I will say that there was one piece of set dressing that I noticed that during the crash, there was a photo of Herbert Hoover on the wall. That felt very intentional to me.
What's important to understand is that, you can look at these capitalist solutions all you want, but it just shows, we always heard that in the late Bush era and the early days of the Great Recession was buy local. This is how we solve it, is not buying stuff from China. But you can't avoid stuff from China, right? These individual solutions don't work, but this makes it a powerful movie because movies speak to you as an individual. I watched this movie with one other person sitting here in my living room. Yeah. This wasn't about my community coming together and be like, oh yeah, we should start a union. And I do think that there is value in the fact that a movie can speak to you as a person and say, live your life with decency.
Yeah.
Right. Don't just pursue profits. Don't just pursue the moon, but figure out what you're really lassoing up. Figure out what it is that you are taking into your own home and doing for the people around you.
That was a big piece of it too for me watching it. Was I had a few thoughts about what would my world look like now if, let's say, we hadn't gotten together and started doing this show? I've talked about this a little bit. I got laid off all the way back in, I think it was fucking April or May. It was right before my birthday.
Yeah, whichever month that's in.
We'll never know.
Hard to say.
The thing. It's a quantum birthday.
That's right. But without this, without you guys in my life helping to make this thing, I don't know what the balance of this year would have, or really the entire last few years.
Yeah.
Obviously, it would be a different world.
I'd have a full head of hair.
But
I'd be bald.
I like to think that the work that we've done over the past few years, seeing all of the people, including you, dear listener, who are listening to this right now, I like to think that we've made a positive difference, that we have helped people. And that in many ways is, for me personally, an incredible reward.
And it's, I think, why this movie endures. I think the thing that people sort of glom onto is just this idea that no matter how bad it gets, it is always better if you're here.
Yeah. A reason why this movie didn't do well at the box office is because it's a long and generally unhappy movie.
Yeah.
Right. It decides that it wants to earn all of its sentiment. And so it does there by getting as dark as it can go.
Which is unusual for a film of this time.
And for a freshly post-war audience, they didn't really want to wallow in their own history at that point.
Yeah.
Fairly, in some ways you want to just celebrate, we're the winners and everything, but also you just want to not fucking think about that shit anymore.
I mean, the fucking bank run, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Black
fresh
Thursday
history.
was 18 years before this movie came out.
Yeah.
Right.
So just about anyone watching the movie would have lived that.
Many of whom probably lost their homes.
I'd
as a
imagine it's
result.
like watching something like now about the pandemic, right? It's just like,
no one wants to touch that. The fact that it makes this tiny little mention of the Spanish flu is, I think, so interesting because, people didn't make movies about that.
I mean, hell, even 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Like there have been a couple pieces of media about it, but
one very famously in the last 30 seconds of the film and at no point before that.
but I would argue that most of that media has actually been very treacly and has not dealt with what the real feeling and sentiment was. How these material conditions percentage 2 hours, 40 minutes into this recording, how that shapes the world in which you live and how individual actions that you do as a person interact with those material conditions to create a different reality.
And how it makes you unhappy and how it makes you worse.
Yeah.
Not how you're just resilient and you're fighting through it. But that earned sentiment is what gave it the staying power, right?
Yeah.
That and weird copyright things and paperwork and all that. But like people kept watching the movie and they still watch the movie today. And there's a reason for that. You don't just keep watching a movie if there's not something that it's hitting every single time. And what it's hitting every single time is a very true kernel of what it means to be alive and to have a family and to be a part of a community. And it's still resonant to this day. And it's because it does all of the hard work.
Well, thank you for being part of our community this year. We really appreciate you greatly. Just as a reminder, before we wrap up here, at the end of every year, we like to put together that year in review episode where we take phone calls from you, the listener. These are voicemails. And then what I do is I take those voicemails and I stitch them together with clips from the show over the course of the year.
It's very extensive work that he does on these.
Truly. It's a lot of work. But
now we have some better transcription tools at our disposal, though.
It always, I love doing it. Well, I don't love doing it, but I love the results. Let's put it that way.
That's the experience of editing a podcast. You don't actually love doing it, but it's great when it's done.
Can't argue with results, baby.
So today, if you are listening to this on release day, the date is
the 18th.
The 18th. Submissions will be open until this coming Monday, December 23. That's when we are cutting off submissions.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a patron. You can call the number.
And that phone number, which again, give us a call, leave a message. It'll go straight to voicemail. I think you can leave a voicemail that's up to 3 minutes long. Please don't leave a 3-minute long voicemail if you can avoid it. Ideally, it would be a bit shorter.
That one's less likely to be selected.
or it will be extensively edited down, right? Because I do edit these for clarity and
concision,
length. But yeah, the number that you should call if you want to be a part of this is +1. That's right. We're in North America, folks. Area code 347 857-9523. Again, that number is 1-347-857-9523. Just let us know, what the show has meant to you this year, what your favorite moments were, whatever else you'd like us to know. If there's any part of your message that you don't want us to include in the episode, just let us know what that is, whether it's part or all of the message. And we look forward to hearing those calls from you. Also, if you are not able to easily call a North American phone number, you can just record a voice memo and send it to worstofallpossibleworlds@gmail.com.
And if you would like to become a patron of our show, give us a little Christmas present of buying our product. We have premium episodes and fancy movie time, and for the $10 patrons we have Lads Cast, all just waiting for you on that sweet little website, sweet little app. But don't subscribe using the iOS app because Apple will charge you extra money. So subscribe through a browser or through the Android app. If you have an Android phone, don't worry about it.
Unless you want to pay like $3 extra a month directly to Apple for nothing at all.
We should make an extra tier that's just $3 extra for
but we get
no benefit, and it's just like, do not subscribe via the iPhone app. If you do that, you will pay exactly this amount. Just pay us the extra money. Just pay us the extra money.
Yeah, we'll get we'll call it the Tim Apple $8
the
tier.
Tim Apple tier. Anyway, yes.
These tiers used to be named after characters from Candide. Oh,
it's
well.
all right. It's all getting degraded. You can also become a $10 patron at our Pangloss tier, which is named for Candide.
Yes.
That's where you get access to lads.
Pangloss.
Yeah, well, yes.
From Candide.
I'm cool, Voltaire. And that's where you get access to Lads Cast, where we shoot the shit about whatever's on our mind once a month. And at $20, you can have legs.
Yep.
That also gives you nothing extra, but
and we will be putting out a bonus episode for all Patreon subscribers on Christmas that will be very, very, very related to what we just talked about today.
And that's for everybody, regardless of tier. Either way, hope to see you on the Patreon. Hope to get your phone calls. And thank you again for listening to our show this year.
So look, the truth of it is we don't know the ramifications of our own kindness. We don't know whose life we're going to save by doing them a good turn. And yeah, maybe it's true that if we were never born, a town wouldn't degrade into neon and jazz. Maybe that's not the extent of our reach. But everyone reaches someone, and you are valuable, and you are worth more alive than dead, and you owe it to the world and to yourself to stick around. So stand up to the Potters, be kind to your fellow man, and in the immortal words of a hapless angel who happened to get his wings, remember that no man is a failure who has friends. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
Defeat your haters by staying alive. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.